The DM punished our party for not resolving the plot hook with a heist that they had planned for. The party elected to try and recover the item of interest mid-transit instead of trying to break into a secure location. The DM initiated combat by having the caravan leader attack my illusionary double, misled, just by walking by on a crowded city street. No rolls, no checks. Caravan leader just immediately knows who I am and where I am, and who my companions are too somehow. We get into it about how detect magic can't see invisible creatures, because, it can't. So yeah, the DM called it for the night. 2 weeks later, we resume the game. Dungeon Master adds several high-level NPCs to purposefully, by admission, make the fight just unwinnable. He also locks the item in an oversized and heavy magical crate. The entire caravan even abandons their objective just to fight the party to the death in crowded city streets. Screw us for going off the rails, I guess. This DM actually did something respectable by stopping the session so that they could plan for the new route the party decided to take. Though instead of taking those 2 weeks to, move encounters from the bank into the train so that they could be reskinned or recontextualized, or creating new encounters entirely for the train encounter, they instead decided to just punish the party for not going along the railroad while they're on a literal train. Could have been a cool moment for the whole game, but I guess some things are just not meant to be. Probably a relatively minor horror story given what others here have experienced, but I wanted to vent a bit. Our group had just finished a homebrew 1 to 20 campaign. We used D&D Beyond for the entirety of the game, with the DM paying for the top subscription so the source books and rules would be readily available for all players to reference, and we could easily click things on our sheet to learn more about it. This became so useful because we were all new to the game. I spent a lot of time reading through the content and learning how to play, even found some cheat sheets and shared them with the party. However, it seemed the other players did not read the rulebook and barely read their character sheets. The DM and I often stepped in to try and help them, but were often waved off with something along the lines of, well, why would I read that? This is just to give some background, but playing the campaign with them was a horror story on its own. To help scratch the itch of not having any D&D, the DM and I were playing around with different builds, creating characters on D&D Beyond with the DM's shared content for fun and theory crafting. One of the players came into the voice chat and asked what we were doing as we're laughing over the silly build we've made. We explain, and the player starts mocking us, calling us nerds because we care about the rules of this game for some reason. Said player then offered to DM a game for us if we didn't care about the rules because the rules don't make sense anyway, and said the last game they DM'd for was fun. This was curious because this player was notorious for not knowing the rules at all, or even what was going on during the campaign, so I asked for an example of what they meant with the rules. They pointed to their campaign character as an example, who happened to be a monk and sorcerer multiclass. My monk could be really strong, but Stunning Strike rarely works because the monk's save DC is too low. The DM and I started explaining that DC isn't fixed per class, but increases if you put more points into the associated ASI. That's dumb, it should just increase as you level. Well, good news, it does, as save DC is a combination of ASA modifiers and your proficiency bonus, which increases as you level. Unfortunately, we explained, you only had +2 in Wisdom, which powers your Stunning Strike save DC. You took feats instead of increasing your skills. Well, I didn't know it worked like that. For reference, it had been mentioned several times during the campaign how save DC worked, and why ability skills were important to take, and sometimes better than feats. We usually did this when a player was complaining about how low their save DC was. This player immediately jumped to their next point. Well, my sorcerer spells were always really weak. Take the spell Sleep, for example. It was really good at low levels, but it was useless in the end of the campaign against the higher level enemies. I point out to them that you're meant to upcast it to increase its power, but because they multiclassed into monk, they had max 3rd level spell slots for their sorcerer at character level 15. Well, I shouldn't need to upcast it. My spells should just get stronger without needing to cast higher level spell slots. So you want the ability to cast spells with 8th level power with only 5 levels in sorcerer. Yeah, no thanks. I only said that sounds really unbalanced and went back to theory crafting. I don't think I'll be taking them up on their offer to DM. I know I'm going to say something similar to this at the end of this video, but look, if you want to play a super rules light, super unbalanced game, that's your choice, and you know what? Good for you, that's awesome. However, the moment you start trying to force that style onto others, that's when this becomes a horror story, and that's when you open yourself up to judgment. And here we are judging. Is D&D a perfect game? No, but it is a game with rules, and those rules are the basis for a lot of what we do. Now, it doesn't mean that every rule needs to be followed precisely. Changing the rules is actually in the rule book, but getting rid of them entirely, well, at that point, you may as well play a more rules-light RPG system, which there are plenty of out there. Also, if you're going to yell at your DM about the rules, please understand the rules. I mean, they played a whole 1 to 20 campaign. You'd think they would have come up at some point throughout the game. Guess not. So I played a Witcher tabletop role-playing game with 6 players. I made several things very clear to everyone involved from the beginning and repeated it several times. Number 1, actions have consequences. Number 2, working together is the only way to succeed. Number 3, charging in without a plan will likely get you killed, or at least lose body parts. Number 4, people you meet will not take kindly to dangerous or foolish behavior. And number 5, combat is extremely risky and can be deadly. 2 of my players totally refused to even try to remember anything, and while one was more of the brooding silent guy waiting for combat, the other one regularly made trouble while also extremely fast to start a fight with people they just didn't like. So far, this resulted in 2 party members leaving the group, getting their own mini campaign for a short time, and the party being chased by bounty hunters all the time. In the wilderness, they meet 2 NPCs trying to investigate the dying trees and animals in the region, and of course, necromancy is at work. The party offers to help and everyone tags along until they find a clearing filled with mist in which multiple wraiths and a penitent, a ghost that is invulnerable as long as it can hide in mist, it creates to fight you, so you have to get rid of the mist. Oh, and also you could kill the person that it's haunting. Okay, anyway, in the middle of that clearing is a tree, and after some investigation it becomes apparent that the person the wraiths want to kill is sitting on that tree. The party starts thinking about how to get to the tree without getting in range of the wraiths, and to either talk to the person up there and find out more, or kill them based on the situation. They have some interesting thoughts, and they keep planning until our problem player decides he'll just randomly shoot at the tree through the mist without being able to see anything. A groan echoes through the group. Since the player doesn't even want to hide his intentions, I let everyone roll awareness. One pretty wounded player and an NPC realize what he's up to and roll higher initiative. The player shoves the crossbow away from its target while the NPC takes his axe and strikes at the crossbow, which destroys our problem player's weapon in the progress. The problem player attacks the NPC and gets downed momentarily while 2 others throw away their weapons and declare they won't participate in this, while one other player even casted a minor curse on him, more of an annoyance than really damaging. The problem player proclaims this is BS. I explained that he just tried to jeopardize everything that was planned by these people, and he should be glad that the NPCs just attacked his weapon, while his character would probably have used lethal means if it was the other way around. He says that if his crossbow is destroyed, which by the way it could have been repaired in a while, he will just walk into the mist. At this point, I got tired of this and just allowed him to walk into the mist. The silent, brooding player pulled his character back. He got the description of the curse and again proclaimed that if the curse affected him, he would walk into the fog. And that, well, that was the last we saw of his character. Disclaimer, I usually don't encourage PvP, but since the problematic playstyle was already discussed out of game, and at this point it would have probably been extremely out of character not to cast the curse or do something similar to teach that character a lesson, I just allowed it. I posted a pretty long message in our gaming group after that session, and neither the problem player nor the silent and broody player are part of the group anymore. Luckily, the character that was cut down in the process was saved by the spectacular healing skills of another player character. So in the end, the escalation probably was just for the best. TLDR, NPC has a logical reaction to player character's irrational behavior. Consequences occur, player threatens to kill his character multiple times, we can't ignore said consequences, and then the character dies. I don't have anything to say on Edgy and Brooding. He was barely in the story, and really he was just there. Whereas our main problem player, our instigator, well, there's a little bit more to say there. Like I said, he is an instigator, a player who is trying to create situations at the game that, yeah, maybe to him are fun and entertaining, but to everyone else are cumbersome and just bog down the entire game for everyone. It's really not fun to have an instigator at the table, and here it was handled pretty well. The instigator tried to create a situation that would have really screwed over the player characters. There's a bunch of wraiths, there's also an invulnerable ghost. Fighting those things probably wouldn't work out for them, especially in low visibility. The DM used an NPC that was present to stop the player character from doing this and prevent the session from going off the rails. Now, I do think that this is a viable route for most instigatory behavior. However, I will say if this is a repeat thing, it's okay if the DM just straight up says, no. Like, not as a character, just you, the DM, are like, no, don't do that. There's a classic skit from XP to level 3, I believe, where a player character attempts to fireball the party, and the DM just goes,
no.
I think that's more than a valid response. But hey, it looks like it just brought this group closer together, so all's well as ends well with this D&D game. My horror story involves an old World of Darkness play-by-post forum. These used to be a lot more common, I think. My spouse is still in at least one, but it's tiny and still shrinking. Anyway, the gag on these is that White Wolf like to pretend that all their various games, vampire, werewolf, wraith, mage, changeling, etc., could all interact and you could run them with/against each other. This did not actually work very well in practice, but it was a noble goal. So this was a forum set up as a city, and you could apply as basically any kind of White Wolf character and then start interacting with the various ongoing plots, both character-driven and GM-directed. Time would advance forward at set intervals, and a single night of game time often lasted weeks or months. At the time of the story, the original game masters were getting tired and fed up, and most of the plots were being run by their various lieutenants, who were gradually, and would eventually, take charge of the whole shebang and try to salvage the wreckage of this once intended metaplot, which was terrible, by the way. In the meantime, the players were all merrily roaming around, having varying levels of fun. Unfortunately, one of those players was Susan. Susan was a friend of the head game master, the original founder of the forum. She had played in the World of Darkness game that he had used as a skeleton of this play-by-post world, and the subtext I remember getting from staffers is that they were currently, or had previously been, boinking on the reg. Susan was not like the other players, of whom even the longer-running characters had earned their experience and paid for their advancements. Susan, well, she had gifts. All of her characters routinely ignored the time/date and location tags, more or less teleporting around the city at will and having a hive mind, with all of them instantly knowing anything she learned via her other characters, and all of them suddenly having inexplicable dislikes or attachments to other players' characters based on their interactions with just one of Susan's PCs. This was just bad player behavior though, and not the real special crap she got to have. For example, and the one I know the least about because I never played that game and avoided them in character, her werewolf had a spirit guide, which is not unusual, but it's of a literal unicorn, which is flat out against the rules. And she was actively engaged in a romantic relationship with a mage. For those who don't know, werewolves canonically regard mages as monsters, stealing Gaia's power and mucking up the natural flow of energy, stuff like that. Or there was her vampire character, Ravnos, of course, who not only was able to know magic, but also had psychic powers. And not like Troy, I sense anger, but more like Akira or Carrie, where she would intermittently, whenever Susan got bored or felt like the scene wasn't focused enough on her, this other player character would lose control and scream telepathically, giving everyone in several city blocks a blinding migraine and glimpses of Susan's dark past and faded future. Vampires in these World of Darkness games have a thing called the Masquerade. It's literally the subtitle of the game. They pretend they aren't real, and they get very angry with any vampires who bring attention to themselves or anything supernatural going on. Somehow, this walking masquerade breach was not just tolerated, but was actively the pet of the city's prince, who was a whole other awful kettle of fish, an NPC run by the soon-to-be former game master, and everyone was ordered in character to give her any assistance whenever she requested. She would often pull this stunt at an Elysium, where even making a threatening gesture toward another vampire is grounds, more or less, for immediate death. I mean, let alone psionically assaulting the city's entire vampire population, but no, it was It was fine. The prince went to pet her hand, and the entire plot and every conversation had to stop while we fetched supplies to make sure she was feeling better. The worst of all Susan's characters, though, was this little girl. A mage, oh yes. A bit of rules/canon explanation beforehand. In Old World of Darkness, mages had a stat called Orate, which is the usual White Wolf core power stat. It governs everything mages can do with their magic. Starting characters get 1 Orate, or maybe 2 if you burn out your freebie points on it, and it is extremely hard to earn more in-game. Like, all of the experience points earned over months of weekly sessions type hard, representing years of focus and training for the character. Friends, Susan's little 5-year-old girl had Arate 5. Basically, a god. At the age of 5! This little girl was the terror of the entire board. Most other World of Darkness creatures had very little they could feasibly do against a mage's power, even when the mage is restrained by the actual rules of the game, which this child was not. She was also written exactly as badly as you can imagine, with lots of twee descriptions and demands to play and so on. I don't think she went full ooh-woo translation on it, but it was awful to read. Clearly the product of someone who had never met a child and got all their knowledge of how children behave from Looney Tunes. I mentioned ignoring the rules, so another brief aside for those unfamiliar with the game, mages are restrained by consensus belief, which defines the nature of reality. A long time ago, an organization called the Technocracy convinced everyone in the world that science was real, and now trying to do impossible things is very difficult. Mage players are supposed to be clever about having justifications for things, like having a hidden dart gun to explain why the guy just fell unconscious, or explaining away a fire spell with broken gas mains, and so on. When mages do blatantly impossible things, reality smacks them back with paradox, which can be extremely damaging, even crippling or deadly. The bigger the impossible thing, and more importantly, the more people who witness it, the heavier and harder the paradox backlashes. Susan's little girl says, "What's paradox, teehee?" She summoned magical creatures and rode them around on public streets. She hurled lightning bolts and used superhero tier telekinesis on a whim. If you dared to open a post thread where you wanted to put up some fun cagey vampire chat or meet up with some pack mates for a run, you were always risking the little girl dropping in instead, at which point she would demand you entertain her, with the implicit threat of destruction at the subatomic level if you did not. Susan's other characters all fawned over this little girl. Everyone else ran like hell or treated her like the walking thermonuclear time bomb that she was. I distinctly recall several weeks where my vampire character was dragged along one of her jaunts, terrified, but being unable to flee, while she destroyed buildings, rearranged streets, and hunted werewolves for us to make friends with. Werewolves kill vampires on sight. They are usually, anathema. There is a happy ending to the story. However, as I said, the GM was getting distinct and unhappy with the game, and he eventually stepped aside completely. Susan remained under the new management, who were the aforementioned lieutenants who had been chafing at not being allowed to actually apply any of the rules to her, at least up until then. Her werewolf got a stern talking to from the pack leader. Next, her little girl got hit with paradox for the very first time, prompting a tantrum both in and out of character, with her next spell attempt, a giant fireball to destroy a chunk of the city, instead resulting in sufficient paradox to more or less delete the character from reality. The Ravnos with the psychic powers was fine, albeit annoying, until the next game she pulled her crap at Elysium, at which point the new prince had her restrained. She, the prince is a gender-neutral position in Vampire the Masquerade, then gave her a speech about not using offensive powers under the seal of Elysium, and keeping a lid on the damn masquerade. Susan decided that this was so upsetting that her Ravnos had a full-bore attack of her little psychic problem, and tried to disable the entire room full of the most powerful vampires in the city. She was summarily knocked into torpor and staked out for the sunrise, at which point, blessedly, Susan finally flouched, calling us all a variety of rude names as she dramatically and publicly quit the server. And I thought we had seen enough of main character syndrome. This lady not only had one main character, she had three. She had 3 whole main character syndrome characters in this World of Darkness game, which, is really annoying, not only because she is trying to attain the spotlight, but also because she is actively trying to harm the experience of other players. Look, PvP can absolutely work. It's a delicate thing, but it can work. However, clearly here it's not working. This player is going out of her way to just be annoying as all hell, using god powers to essentially just ruin the experience for everyone else. Whether it is just psychically stunning everyone in the radius around her, which is ridiculous, or using magical girl powers to just ruin their day for no reason. Your actions in the game should make the game more fun to play. If you make the game more arbitrarily difficult for other people, or just are generally annoying, or make the experience unpleasant, I don't really see a reason to keep you or your character in the game. So this is a strange story, even for my standards. Time ago, I was on a Discord server during the pandemic, and I was discussing certain games with the people in chat, to which one particular individual, whom we will call Kenneth, for obvious reasons, is in the conversation listening carefully. The server was focused on TTRPGs, but most people only did Dungeons & Dragons because it was the only thing they knew, and I have a reputation for being the dealer of games. I'm the shady guy who goes, "Psst, hey, wanna play some Vampire the Masquerade? The cool kids play Vampire the Masquerade." Yeah, I'm that type of guy. The thing I'm describing this time is Exalted. Now, some of you may go, oh boy, the moment I said that name, for those who don't know what Exalted is, I'll try to summarize as this. Think Avatar The Last Airbender plus Final Fantasy 3-4 and a bit of 7, add Ghibli's Mononoke, Nausicaa, Laputa, and a bit of Macross Plus, a bit of Evangelion, a lot of 90s martial arts anime, and you are halfway there. It's a high fantasy TTRPG that tries to emulate the drama and combat of anime, with all the style and rule of cool you can squeeze into the damn book. That being said, the book has its flaws, but that's not why we're here. So I had a few people interested, among them, we had Kenneth. As I was explaining the backstory of the game, I went into the myth of creation when Sol Invictus gave his powers to exalted individuals to bear his power, and how the Solar Exalted were gods among gods, to which Kenneth goes, "Excuse me, what?" "Oh yeah," I said, "Exalted has a rich mythology, and there's a god for everything. It's very close to animism in theory." "Anna what?" said Kenneth. Animism, you know, a religious belief in which everything, every object, and every being in nature has a corresponding god. The god of rivers, the god of winds, the god of harvest, the god of the blade, the god of hammers, etc. "I don't get it," said Kenneth, to which everyone was silent, and I said, "It's kind of common in, like, anime." "Yeah, but, like, I don't get it. I mean, it can be possible in Japan, but in Christianity, there's only one god, and believing there's more is heresy." I couldn't believe it. The guy couldn't separate his personal perspectives from a game, or even expand his personal horizons to consider that possibility. "I don't like it. It sounds satanic." To which one of the other players said, "How can that be satanic?" "Well, again, the belief on other gods beyond the god in Jesus is kind of disrespectful." Another player in the chat interjected, "But don't you run Dungeons and Dragons? Isn't there like a huge pantheon of gods?" Kenneth said, "What's a pantheon?" I explained, you know, different gods with their own systems of belief, to which Kenneth replied one of the many things to this day that made me speechless. "Yeah, but in D&D games, I don't use other gods. I made Jesus in D&D and God, and then there's Satan. It's very easy to understand, and it follows the Christian values." One of the players responded, "But like, what if I'm Jewish and I don't believe in Christ?" To which Kenneth just nonchalantly said, "Well, I won't let you join my games. As simple as that." After that, I had to take 5. Time passed, and I ended up running Exalted for a bit to a few of the players. We had fun, and I'm glad Kenneth didn't join the game, but I'm still baffled that he was so zealous. I'm gonna say it right at the top here. If Kenneth wants to create and run his purified Christian D&D game, that's fine. That's great. Good for him. Frankly, he can have a great time with his players as long as they are also having fun. However, the moment the guy starts to try and force that style of game onto other people, that's when he opens himself up to criticism and at times mockery, which I like to think is the speciality of this channel, so let's briefly get into it. The requests this guy had for the game were not necessary to make the game better or to facilitate the other people at the table. In fact, I mean, that ending line, "I would just not let you into my games," is very indicative to how this guy thinks. It's either my way or the highway. And I understand that there are things that people aren't going to compromise on. That makes sense. If you have a phobia, if you have a trigger, I get that. But that's not what we're seeing here. We're not seeing someone who's trying to ensure safety or comfortability at the table. We're seeing someone who's trying to force religious values and proselytize through Dungeons and Dragons, which, yeah, not great, especially for the unwilling. Alright, and that's it for today's episode of RPG Horror Stories. If you guys enjoyed it, then please do leave a like. If you want to see more of my content, then you can check out Tabletop Tavern Tips, where I give you D&D advice for both DMs and players, old and new. And while you're there in the cards, subscribe Crispy's Tavern to get more of our content right as it comes out. And finally, if you want to leave your own stories or thoughts, go down into the comments down below. If you can't think of a comment, leave the comment Purified D&D to let me know you made it to the end of the video. In essence, like, comment, subscribe. I will see you all next time. Farewell.